Hey everybody, welcome back to Techniques of the Week. Today we'll be talking about stress and our response. Do some check-ins, talk about where anxiety comes from and the different types of stressors we have, and then what we do when we feel stressed. Quick challenge, and then best ways to get in touch with me. So some good news, we got a whole bunch of gravel this past weekend, and I moved as much of it around as I could and made a little walkway, but we had some left over. So I started a little Zen garden. It's kind of cool. An app review yesterday, we got on something called House Party, and we connected with a bunch of old friends from graduate school, and there were 6 of us, and it was really cool. Not just to see and hear from everybody, but we also were able to play some trivia games, which was a whole lot of fun. It made the 40 minutes just sort of fly by. And then a random fact: disco music in the world of psychology is considered a mild stressor. So when they're looking at the effect of stress on like animals, or even they do experiments with stress on plants, they consider disco music to be a mild stressor. So kind of funny. So anxiety, our bodies have evolved to adapt to a lot of incredible circumstances. If you think about what human beings are capable of doing, we are really quite amazing organisms. Everything that we have, everything that we do, it all serves a purpose, and each individual purpose acts to help us survive. So the question is, why do we feel fear, anxiety, and stress? These things just, they're not pleasant, they're not fun. Why would we want to feel these things? Our brains needed a way to let us know that there was some sort of life-threatening situation. Something was going to happen, or there was an imminent threat, and it needed a way to tell us, hey, pay attention and you got to do something. So that is, we feel that is stress or fear, and that makes us act. So the answer then, why we feel fear, anxiety, or stress, is all about motivation. It gets us to do something. So stress gets the bad rap of being bad, or we don't want to feel stressed, or we want to strive to have a stress-free life. That's really not true. We need stress. We need to have these feelings of fear, of anxiety, of worry in order to motivate us to act and to really make the most out of life and stay alive, or just really make sure that we've got all of our boxes checked and we're making moves. So our stress response really started out as a way to escape danger or react to tangible stressors, things that we could see or feel, or were kind of right in our environment. So we were able to see these examples: animals that might want to eat you, standing on a tall cliff, being yelled at, driving in a blizzard. All of these things are tangible stressors. So it makes our anxiety or fear response very, very meaningful, very valid. It's right in front of us. You got to do something in order to take away the threat, or at least make sure you're going to be safe. However, as we evolved, as we got more and more complicated and complex, so did our stressors. So now we start feeling stressed by non-tangible stressors just as easily. So these are things like wanting to do well at your job, worrying about money, asking somebody out, or writing a paper, doing schoolwork. None of these things are going to directly hurt us. They're not a direct imminent threat that would warrant a fear response. But because we evolved and we are so much more complex now, this is how our body responds to them in the same way as it would a tangible stressor. So what happens with our stress reaction system? When it's a tangible stressor, it makes sense because you see a lion that's trying to eat you, and then when we escape that danger, we can relax. The problem is with intangible stressors, the way that we've sort of evolved now, just because we started doing a little bit of work on a paper, or we thought about making a social approach, that situation can be ongoing. We might always worry about money. We might always worry about doing well in school or our jobs. So that means that we can never relax in the same way because it's intangible, because we don't always see it. It's always sort of there in the back of our mind. And it's when we have this ongoing reaction to intangible stressors, that's when we start to develop anxiety disorders, or really perseverative worry that really doesn't help us in the long run. So fear is that basic automatic response to the perception of danger. So there's an imminent threat. You see a snake, you have a fear response. Anxiety is when, so maybe you saw the snake once, and now anytime you go for the same hike or you go outside into the same area, you worry about there being a snake there. So this is all about imagining future threats. So the anxiety doesn't mean that something's going to happen or that something's even there. It's all about worrying the what ifs. And then finally, worry is that persistent anxiety. So heightened anxiety persists in spite of using some coping skills or problem solving strategies. So with the snake example, keeping that going, in spite of doing things like going for a hike in a different spot or not hiking at all or taking, I don't know, snake repellent if that's a thing, in spite of doing these things, you're still unable to get over that anxiety, and it causes you to worry to the point where your brain starts to do some different things like shut down and really avoid anything that could be related to that initial fear response. So I mentioned a little bit ago that stress is not always a bad thing, right? We need stress in order to motivate us to do things, but too much stress isn't helpful, and not enough stress isn't helpful. So this is kind of the graph, and it might be a bit of an oversimplification, but essentially what this is saying is that your performance is at its optimal peak when you have an appropriate level of stress. If you have too little stress, you're bored, you're disinterested, you're just sort of sitting there like I don't really care. And if you have too much stress, that can cause a complete meltdown. On the a little bit near sides, minor stress can lead to okay performance as long as you're interested. And maybe too much leads to strong anxiety. So, really, we want to have that middle level of stress in order to have the best performance that we can. And this is a stress curve. And this is sort of saying, okay, with one single stressor, we can have really good stress. But when we get to the stage of two, so let me go back. So when we're at homeostasis, when we're at that good stress, that's kind of where we want to be most of our lives. We want to have enough stress to where we're motivated and we're doing things, but not overwhelmed. At the alarm stage, so this is where that initial stressor comes in, and we have a little bit of a reaction, and we might actually do really well coping with it for a moment. But then we get to the resistant stage, and that's really where a lot of people spend time trying to fight the stress or to figure out how are they going to work with the stress. And it's very possible to come from the resistant stage back to homeostasis, back to good health. However, if we're not able to bring it back, what can happen is we start to get exhausted, and we start to really not be able to function as well as we could. We're out of that optimal performance range. And when that happens, we start to compromise our immune system, our work starts to deteriorate no matter what. We sort of get into this breakdown or burnout point. So what do we do about it? How can we respond to all these intangible stressors? Well, three pretty simple ideas are to make them more tangible. So write your stressors down on a piece of paper or find some worry object that could represent what you're stressed out about. Just try to channel the stress that you're feeling in your head to something that you can see with your eyes. And validate that you are having a stress response. A lot of times we try to avoid or escape or pretend that we're not stressed out. And this only makes the problem worse, right? We think that maybe if we ignore it for long enough, it's going to go away, but that's not the case. It just gets bigger and bigger and worse and worse. So the best thing you can do is validate that stress and say, hey, I am pretty stressed out about this, and that's okay. That's kind of part of life. And then figuring out how to make a plan to cope or problem solve with that stressor. I hope you guys are able to come back tomorrow when I talk about coping skills versus problem solving strategies, because based on the type of stress you're feeling, the two different responses are going to be much more effective. So last up, just a challenge for you guys. Sit down with a paper or notebook or your phone or whatever you use to write, and think of as many stressors as you can. You can include positive stressors like cooking a meal, or like I had that house party with some friends, digitally on the app yesterday. Sometimes those positive things are still stressful. And think about the different sources of stress you have: social, academic, things with your family, things at work. And after about 5 minutes, after you've got a decent list generated, step back and take a look at all of those stresses that you have going on. And really, validate the stress like we just talked about, but also validate yourself. You've got a ton of stress in your life. And, just looking at how much you deal with on a day to day basis, you're really pretty incredible. So give yourself a pat on the back. Keep that list handy for tomorrow. Like I said, we're going to go through and figure out when to use a coping skill and when to use a problem solving strategy. So, hope to see you then. Another slide of best ways to get in touch with me. Again, email is the most consistent. But if you do have a bloodhound, feel free to send them over to 221B Baker Street. Be happy to see them.